Thanks, Ciancórla. Minister, I think it is a little bit of maybe an indictment of the present government's handling of the situation in An Garda Síochána, that on the one hand everything is different, but yet it remains the same. The reality is that over the course of the lifetime of this government there has been a sea change in the attitude of the population towards the Guards, a greater consciousness and understanding of their role, and probably a greater demoralisation existing inside the service than at any time before. And rather than dealing with that issue, which, let's face it, wasn't new, it had been brewing for decades at least, surfaced initially in the horrendous findings of the Morris Tribunal, where the idea of a few bad apples in a particular part of the country was mooted. But it suddenly became very clear that it wasn't a few bad apples, but it was a systemic problem in the functioning of An Garda Síochána, the blue wall of silence which resulted in them being apart from the general population. And as a result of some of the activities that I'll deal with in a minute that emerged in the course of this government's lifetime, ye had the opportunity to do something about that. And instead of taking that opportunity, what we have is a fig leaf, an attempt to derail the public attention that's been put on this issue, the genuine demand that we should have a police service that's accountable to the population has been scuppered, and instead we have this fig leaf is the best, most flattering word I can give to it. I could be much more insulting, but in polite conversation I won't. Let's step back and look at Fennelly for a minute. And the reason why we need to do that is that the Taoiseach, in his defence of his role in Fennelly and the sacking of the Garda Commissioner, pointed to the fact that, well, look at all these great things we're doing to reform the Gardaí, and he pinpointed this exact piece of legislation. Now, it's quite clear when you read Fennelly, many people have made the point that it would appear to be very contradictory, and in some ways it is, but in the same way we could say this was an incredibly thorough report put together by a very able individual. And the reason why the circle can be squared is only in the circumstances where you look at Fennelly's terms of reference. And he was asked to look at the visit to the Commissioner's house, the department of the Commissioner, in the context of the tapes controversy. But it's quite clear when you look at what happened is there's no way the Commissioner jumped because of the tapes. Because ironically, that was one area where he actually did perform perfectly well. He equipped himself totally well. He stopped the practice as soon as he was made aware of it. He accounted for the tapes, gathered them, secured them, sought advice from the Attorney General and other departments. Yes, he was found negligent in his failure to notify the Minister, but he was awaiting information on that. Everything else was okay, and it's quite clear from Fennelly that the Commissioner had become toxic, that his role was untenable. No news to us. We'd been calling for his departure long before he actually jumped. But the problem is the manner in which it was done. But let's look at that. Why did the Commissioner have to go? Because of enormous problems inside the Garda Síochána. And they were blown by the heroic stance of the whistleblowers. Now, it might be all well and good now for everybody to bandy around criticisms of the Gardaí and all the rest of it, every media report. It's readily accepted in this House now that there's a problem in An Garda Síochána. But when we raised those matters first on behalf of the whistleblowers, that wasn't accepted. In actual fact, we were criticised in the media, we were criticised in this House. How dare we raise a question at the heroic men and women inside An Garda Síochána. So everything has changed substantially, and if you like, as a result of the revelations of the whole-scale malpractice existing under the penalty points operation, it blew the lid. It proved to people what they long suspected, that there were problems inside the Gardaí, and that gave the confidence to a lot of other people to come forward to talk about the problems that they had in terms of the functioning of the Gardaí, in terms of horrendous cases of injustice, which ended up in the formation of the independent review mechanism and the hundreds of cases buried in there because those people people haven't got any nearer to getting justice. Their issue has just been kicked down the road. And what we see is that the wanton indiscipline that Justice Smithick also talked about in terms of An Garda Síochána is still there. We have a new commissioner and a new minister, but pretty much life goes on as it was, and the experience of the present whistleblowers is very much a dim one. When one whistleblower goes and makes a complaint against a senior Garda, information is leaked to that senior Garda about the complaint that he made, and then subsequent to that, the new commissioner appoints the same person who leaked the information to carry out a disciplinary action on that other senior Garda, his friend. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up, but it is live and current inside the Gardaí now. And, you know, people talk about political policing. And I think we'd have to say political policing isn't picking on a political party, it isn't whinging about feeling victimised or anything like that. Political policing goes hand in hand with capitalism. It's a system whereby the state relies on the police to basically promote and defend the interests of the wealthy at the expense of the majority of citizens. And the real purpose of this debate here is not to whinge about that, but look at how we can make it better. Because I think what has changed in the course of this government as a result of great action by whistleblowers is that the public understand that's not the type of police force they want. They want a modern police service that operates to human rights standards, that's accountable to the community and serves the community. And I think that's what most guards want who joined An Garda Síochána for the right reasons. And that's in society's interest, it's in everybody's interest that we would get that. And a key nugget in getting that is the delivery of an independent Garda authority. Is that what this government is proposing? It most certainly is not. This piece of legislation is an utter insult. It's incredibly weaker compared to the bill, which has already gone through second stage here, moved by Deputy Wallace, which actually does provide for an independent police service. In this bill here, ministerial and political control over the authority and the Garda Síochána is being retained by the Minister. That's a fact, no question about it. And we've had a lot of fanfares around this issue. The Taoiseach told us in March of 2014 that this so-called independent policing authority will be up and running by the end of 2014. Now we're being told it will be up and running by the end of 2015. Highly, highly unlikely. The reality is that under this bill, ministerial and government control of the authority and the guards are maintained at every turn, with the exception maybe that they can do a bit of CCTV on their own. Everything else they need to consult the Minister on. And the heads envisaged a model where there was a division of accountability between security and policing work of An Garda Síochána. Now, accountability is directly to the Minister in relation to security issues, but in relation to accountability on policing matters, on the one hand it's to the Minister alone, but sometimes reporting responsibilities on policing matters are to both the Minister and the authority, and sometimes to the authority, who's then responsible and accountable to the Minister. It's an absolute fudge. It's chaotic, it's not clear, and it's a recipe for blame games and the type of flutering around that we had in relation to the GSOC controversy. If you look at the Heads 24, and I think this really exposes how we haven't got an independent policing authority in this bill. The authority, as the Minister proposes it, can only ask GSOC to investigate the Garda Commissioner if they believe that the Garda Commissioner may have committed an offence or behaved in a manner which would constitute serious misconduct if the Minister consents to that happening. I mean, what's that about? How in God's name could the authority be considered to be independent if it can't even investigate the Commissioner without the Minister saying that they're allowed to do so? The Commissioner is being and remaining under the political protection of the Minister, which was the very nub of many of the problems that we saw in the course of this government. Now, you know, we talk about consultation in this process, and these issues have been raised by the public. But the consultation process that was embarked on was an utter sham. The authority that we have here before us is incredibly weaker than any of the proposals that were put to you by the IHREC, by the ICCL, by the experts on policing. It's incredibly weaker than what exists in the north, than what exists in Scotland, than what was put together by the Justice Committee, and laughably, in light of what Deputy Creighton said, it's completely different than what the Labour Party tell us ye thought an independent police authority would be. This watered-down version is a pale shadow of any of those things. And, you know, when Deputy Wallace put together his bill, which I would again say is at second stage, engaged in extensive research and consultation with a massive amount of stakeholders in the preparation of that bill, with Justice for All, with all the GSOC commissioners, with the ICCL, with Transparency International, with all of the academics in this area. We made lengthy submissions to the Justice Committee and so on. That bill is supposed to be at committee stage, but obviously it's going to be trumped by this watered-down version, and I really don't think that that's good enough. You know, the irony when Deputy Creighton talks about trade unions, as if the trade unions must be laughing themselves sick to thinking that their agenda has been furthered by this government, when a lot of their members have been disenfranchised massively by this government. But the reality is that Labour's proposals on this, published in 2014, recommended that the authority would appoint the Garda Commissioner and other senior staff through open competition. Not being done in this bill. That the authority would hold the Commissioner to account. Not being done in this bill. And that the authority would prepare a policing plan with measurable targets. None of these are in this legislation. And actually, it is a poor step that you would be required to consult with the GRA or the AGSI, who I would not count in any way as trade unions or representative of the decent guards inside on Garda Síochána, given the disgraceful conduct of those organisations in trying to stifle transparency and open debate. I think the legislation fails. It deals with performance targets. I would have a severe concern if the government is pushing for target-driven policing on a legislative basis. Does that mean we're going to have a repeat of the doctoring of the crime figures that we saw in the Garda Inspector's report? The bill talks about budgets. The Heads provides that the authority would ensure that the Garda resources were used to maintain the highest levels of efficiency and effectiveness, but this has been changed now to provide advice to the Minister before each financial year. It's absolutely meaningless. And if you compare the real independent policing authorities in Scotland, for example, the authority has 13 members. It's funded from a 10% portion of the overall policing budget. It has a budget of over 110 million, about 60 staff. The one in Northern Ireland has 20 members, a staff of 55, 3 directors of service and a 1.2 billion annual policing bill. In Ireland, we're proposing 8 plus a chairman and $500,000 to set it up. Now, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission gets 6 million, GSOC gets 9 million. I presume you're not saying that the new commission is going to get $500,000, so how much is going to be funded to deliver this new policing board? And it is, you know, we can learn from other countries. Sometimes there are good examples, and we should be repeating what's best in other countries. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And under the Northern Ireland Police Board, a clear primary function of the board there is to hold the Chief Constable and the police service publicly to account in the exercise of their functions, including compliance with human rights standards. And when you scrape it all away, isn't that really what the Irish people want? To have the police force or police service accountable to the population. But we're not getting it through this board. We know we don't get it through the Minister presently, and that's not personally the Minister, the ministerial position. The only way to deliver it effectively is through an independent board. And the difference in the north of Ireland is that the Northern Ireland Police Board has strong monitoring and supervisory functions. It's very interesting, if you look at the wording of this bill, there's only one mention to monitoring. It was mentioned a lot in the Heads of Bill, but it's actually been taken out at this stage. It's now replaced with keeping under review. which means an entirely different matter. So there's no really reference to supervision in this regard. I think, I don't obviously have time, and we'll be certainly moving massive amendments in relation to this legislation, but there should be many of them. The key question here is, what should it be? And I really think if you were serious, you'd scrap this and you'd sit down at committee and look at the very comprehensive bill put together by Deputy Wallace, because what should have been the role of the Minister who's maintaining control in this bill should be transferred to the authority. That's the first thing that needs to be done if this is a real independent body. That's not being done. The authority needs to be able to draw policing plans, to take account of priorities identified, of course, by the government and the Minister, but to oversee that. And the authority has to be the one who monitors compliance with those plans. Otherwise, it's not independent. It's just a complete and utter joke. And it has to have an access to a budget. The authority has to have the responsibility for the appointment of the Commissioner, absolutely, with the approval of Minister and the input of the Minister, absolutely. But it should be the authority that calls the shots on that, and should have the power to request the Commissioner to retire, given particularly the recent controversies that we've had. That's not what's being proposed in this, and I think that's really regrettable. I think it's actually a very serious lost opportunity. I think, as Vicky Conway said in one of her presentations on this issue, GSOC should be in a position to make the Commissioner accountable. The Commissioner shouldn't be a political appointee. And, there needs to be a wider criteria for disciplinary regulations. As she says, an authority which is not given specific powers, such as the setting of policing plans, the determining of budgets and the appointment of the Commissioner, could, on the other hand, be a retrograde step for Irish policing. And that's what we think this is. It isn't even only half a good step forward. It's actually a step back, because it's given the pretence that you're doing something when actually that you aren't. And as she said, in that scenario, which is the scenario we're in now, we create the semblance of independence and accountability without the reality, just as was done with the creation of GSOC in the last decade. This would be a disservice to Irish society and the members of the Garda Síochána, many decent ones who we met, and we stand fully over that statement. This bill is a disservice to the loyal members of An Garda Síochána and to the citizens in this state. The Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, all the NGOs in this area made serious input into this. All of their contributions have been ignored. They said the authority should have a disciplinary role in relation to senior management, and given the air of indiscipline that exists inside the Garda Síochána, I think that's very, very necessary. That's not being provided for here. It is in the north. The membership of the body, Deputy Wallace made points about that earlier. The fact that the initial board is going to be made up of all appointees, that's a joke. That's going to set the tone for the future. The membership of the board should have representatives of minority communities, of those whose paths, if you like, cross with the Gardaí, and who would be most affected, if you like, by measures when the Gardaí, if you like, don't serve the public appropriately. It's a substantial enough bill, but I suppose the main points that we would like to put on the record now is that there has been a huge amount of talk about this. There's a really genuine desire amongst the population to see something different. I think there are many people inside the Gardaí who would like to see something different as well. This isn't this. This isn't even a pale shadow of the heads of bill that she put forward. It's a diametrically watered-down version of that. It bears no semblance to it. It's no relation to what exists in the north or in Scotland, and it is an insult to the bill which has already gone through second stage in this House, which actually would deliver an independent policing authority, which is the key way in which we can have democratic accountability inside the service, and which would be the end of the era of all of the erosion of confidence in the Gardaí around Morris, around the heavy gang, around the whistleblower revelations and all all of the malpractice and injustice and culture of cover-up and secrecy that still prevails inside that organisation. It could be an opportunity to have a clean sweep and a breath of fresh air inside our service, but sadly it's a lost opportunity, and in that, as Vicky Conway says, it does a disservice to all of us. It's actually worse than doing nothing. It's a step back.